for all coming out. A big turnout tonight, so we only have to say I'm leaving and everyone wants to see.
We just want to make sure.
I just have to say that it'll be 2 years before I fully leave. So,
You're getting in the microphone.
that's a bit sad, isn't it? Yeah. But, anyway, we'll go and talk about the transition in a minute, after I do my presentation. But the topic tonight, well, the main thing is to talk about income in a low interest rate environment, which we probably all know about. The key thing there is obviously we want to make sure that you get through your retirement, and income is a crucial part of that. And I'm going to show you that the investments you've got are pretty much going to do that job for you. So we'll talk a bit more about that now. So once I finish, I'll talk I'll pass you on to our new owners who have come down from Sydney, and that's Andrew Whelan, and he'll talk about the transition and what's going to happen. And the main thing there is pretty much everything stays the same, so you won't have to worry too much about the transition. So starting off tonight, I've got to say that there's a disclaimer that this is what we're giving you is general advice. That's the main thing, and of course we give you personal advice on an ongoing basis when you come in and see us, and that's tailored to your own situations. But so going back to it, we're looking at that for most people, or some people in the past, it used to be that you could go to a term deposit or a government bond or some sort of corporate interest rate fund and get an income, which was 5, 6, 7% a few years ago. But now we're living in times where we've got the lowest interest rates ever, and there's some reasons for that. But if you look at what was happening, say 10 years ago, you could get 6% on a term deposit. You've got a house return was probably around 3. A 10-year government bond, you could get about 6. Corporate bonds about 7, 7.5. And REITs, which are property trusts, you could get about 7 on those. And Australian shares, you could get about 6. And commercial property, about 7. So the one that looks outstanding now, that looks out of kilter, is obviously term deposits. 6 down to around 1. 10-year bonds, 6 down to about 1. And corporate bonds, down to about 2. So if you're in those 3 sectors, not happy jam. So if you're living on, assume that you had $1 million when you retired and you're getting 6%, that was $60,000 a year. Most couples could live on $60,000 a year today, but if you're living on now $15,000 a year, that's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to live off that. So that's pretty dramatic for anyone who put all their eggs in term deposits, say 5 or 10 years ago, not expecting interest rates to drop. So people who are using term deposits and government bonds and corporate bonds have really got problems. Now, you do have some of those, but not a lot. We'll talk about that later. But the key thing is that, go back there, that, go wrong way now. Back. Okay, so the key thing is getting you through retirement. Most of you are retired or pre-retirees, and for most people it's a 15 to 20 year process of retiring and going through the early stages, middle and later stages of retirement. And obviously we want to have an income that covers you for all that period, and we don't want you living under the bridge at Commonwealth Avenue. So that's the aim I have for you. So the key thing here is looking at these 2 trajectories. This trajectory is if you looked at the last 10 years' earnings on an investment fund, a balanced fund, which most of you are in, and then looking at the trajectory of expected returns. And you can see obviously a big drop. So we're going from roughly a 19-year drawdown of your investments to where it's 0, to now we're only looking at around 13 to 14 years. For the next 13 to 14 years, you're potentially going to have a big drop off in how your money's going to work for you. And that's like $500,000. And I always say for most people, if you've got around $500,000, you'll get through retirement. Now, the big advantage for most people in Canberra is they've got a composite for a pension as well, as usually $2,000 to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. So, Canberra it won't have the same problems as say people outside of Canberra, where they're relying completely on their own assets to get through retirement and an age pension. But we want to obviously still try and make the money work as much as possible through that 15 to 20 year period. So that graph was showing you that the expected return was we're projecting only 4.9% or around 5% a year projected return for the next 5 years on a balanced fund. In the past 10 years, average balanced funds are averaged about 12. So a big drop. So again, we've got to think about how we're going to generate returns when an average balanced fund, which is shares, property, government bonds, cash, corporate bonds, is not going to generate that return. And potentially, we've got a 31% drop off in the longevity of your funds. So unless your life expectancy drops by 31%, maybe we've got a problem. But of course, the other thing is happening. Longevity of your life expectancy is going up. So even today, so let's go back to 1992. The average life expectancy was 91 for women and 88 for men. Today, around 2020, we're expecting another couple of years on top, so they're 94 and around 91. So life expectancy will get longer, but if our returns are getting shorter, what's going to happen?
Live with it.
That's right, we've got a problem. Houston. That's right, there's going to be a lot of people like that bridge. Bring your own couple of boxes. Yeah. So we've got this major drop in interest rates, not just in Australia, but around the world. And this is the issue that you can see from China, Australia, Europe, US. Now the US was going up in interest rates and they've just decided they're not now, so they're going down again. And Japan, which didn't start off as much. If you're in Japan, you're only expected, even 94, you're only getting 2% interest rates, and now they're down to about 0.1 on a term deposit in their postal bank. But you can see here, Europe and Japan are the two standouts here where they're literally at 0 interest rates. And they're talking about Australia, which is currently at 0.75 interest rates. This is on cash with the Reserve Bank. And potentially there might be more drops. So we're heading down that direction as well. So all the major developed countries in the world are heading towards 0 or at 0, pretty much. China, being a developing country, still got a reasonable return. But you have to really start to say, well, what's going to happen if this is going to stay low lower for longer? That's the theme they've got. Lower for longer. Japan's been pretty much at 0 since 2009, so 10 years. And even before that, they were dropping down to 0. So they can go back 20 years where they're literally getting nothing in the bank. The only benefit of Japan was that they had literally no inflation for 20 years either. So costs haven't gone up, wages haven't gone up. But still, you're not getting anything on your capital. So coming back, looking over a 100-year period here, we've got interest rates on government bonds. This is a little bit deceptive because the Australian government only appeared in 1901, so this is just state government bonds as an interim. But going back to 1860, when Australia was a fairly young country, we were still getting 4, 5, 6% on government bonds. 1920s was a bit of a peak, went up to 8%. But for most of last century, before 1972, before the oil crisis, government bonds were only getting 4, 5 and 6% for long periods of time. So you'd have to say for most of last century we had low inflation and low interest rates. We remember the 70s and 80s where we had high inflation and high interest rates, and that's when you were paying off your mortgage at 10, 12, 13, 14 up to 15%. But interest rates since then, since 1991 was around the peak and then it's dropped since then. So government bonds now, about bit over 1% return on government bonds, so not happy there either. And then in the US, if you go the same sort of scenario, for most of the last century, the US government was only paying 4, 5 and 6% interest rates. They had the same sort of peak. That was when the world oil shock occurred and inflation started all around the world. The price of oil a barrel went from $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel overnight when the OPEC monopoly was created, and they just turned off the taps and made the price of oil go up 3 times. Now, we won't see that again, but potentially that's what triggered inflation during that period. But inflation went up and interest rates went up with it, because you always have this relationship with interest rates and inflation. But today we've got low inflation in Australia, we've got low inflation around the world. And one of the reasons for that is that China has been producing goods at a very cheap price for the last 10 years. They started out with clothing, textiles, footwear, lightly manufactured goods. Now they're starting to produce cars, and they're producing those goods at a much lower rate than most of the world economy could produce it. So our textiles, clothing, footwear industries, our car industries are closed down. They're gone to China. Why? Because their wages are so much more cheaper than we can produce them at. And now we, in result, as consumers, get clothing and textiles, our footwear, much cheaper price than we used to. We used to have tariffs, we used to have quotas. If you were buying clothing and that, you were just paying exorbitant prices compared to the rest of the world. That doesn't happen now. We get pretty competitive clothing, and the world's moved on. We move people out of those industries into other industries. The car industries closed down about 2 or 3 years ago, and now we get pretty much the same price that you could buy a car around the world. But the key thing is interest rates are low because China's pulled down the cost of living. The things you buy, the clothing, textiles, footwear, cars, manufactured goods, have gone down because you can buy it much cheaper. And that's kept inflation low around the world. And so whole industries are closed down, not just in Australia, around Europe. A lot of their industries are closed down and gone to China. In America, as you know, Donald Trump got elected on the basis that the Midwest in the US, the manufacturing states in the US, the blue-collar workers turned out to say, we've lost our jobs, we've lost our future. Let's vote for someone who's promising to change all that. And he's not going to do it, but he made the promise, and of course, enough people believe him to be into power. It'll be interesting next year in the election to see whether he gets re-elected, of course, but if he's not going to jail, but we'll see. So inflation's down, interest rates are a reflection of interest rates and inflation are linked. But now we've got this new phenomenon called negative interest rates. So not only do you only get a low interest, but you get no interest and you get less money than you started with. So it's challenging. Now, that is okay if inflation is negative. If prices drop by 5% and you get if you have a negative, say, 2% interest rate, you're actually better off by 3% because you can use that money in the future. You can actually buy more things with it. So actually it's not as challenging as you'd think, but the thing is it's not obviously good if you are trying to live off your capital, if you're not getting your own capital back and you're not getting interest on the money. One of the reasons for that is because the world there's a glut of money. There's a glut of money, initially from the Middle East. As I said, we talked about when the price of oil went from $3 a barrel to $12, the Middle East was just washed with money, just poured in, because their cost of producing oil didn't go up. But they just got, instead of getting $3 a barrel and making a profit, they got $3 a barrel profit and another $8 on top. And that flooded money into the Middle East. And that's been going on for the last 20, 30 years, since, 40 years, really. So they've got a lot of money sitting in the Middle East because it was draining away from the West. And so they've got huge amounts of money that they invest into world markets. And Asia. Now, in Asia, there's a big, strong tradition of saving. It's said that China saves up to 45% of their GDP each year. So there's a glut of money out there. Too much money. And if you can't invest it, if someone doesn't borrow it, it doesn't make money just sitting in the bank. You've got to lend the money to make money. Because the bank can't just give you money because their money sits in their vaults. So this is the equation. We've got some countries consuming money, that is, they're borrowing money. UK, Australia, New Zealand and the USA is an example, but the big one here, of course, is the USA. They're running government deficits like crazy, they're running corporate debts like crazy, and personal debts. they're borrowing money from countries who save. The oil majors, the oil Middle East, from South Korea, China in particular, a little bit from Europe. A lot of Europeans live in apartments, so they don't have a lot they can spend their money on. They can't expand, like they can't put a new bedroom on, or like in Australia, they can only spend their money on so many things. So Europe in general is actually a bit of a net saver. Most people in Europe don't own their own homes. 70% of people rent. So they don't have to borrow money to live anywhere. They live in apartments. So a lot of Europeans do save. But you can see here the major oil exporting countries were saving over, this is a period you can't see it, but that's from 96 to 2015. So you can see the oil majors until recently were major savers. Only the last 2015-16, the price of oil dropped after the GFC, so that's why they weren't saving then. But you've got places like South Korea saving, because they don't basically have the social welfare system we have. You've got to save for your retirement. I was told the other day in Hong Kong, you can get a pension in Hong Kong, but you've got to work. So if you ever go to Hong Kong, you go to a restaurant, you've got a 60, 70-year-old person serving you. Well, that's because they have to work to get their pension in Hong Kong. So they've got to do something, and it's a low-value job they can do. So you can see here, China, of course, as I said, that's a huge amount of saving coming in. So this money's got to find a home, and the home it finds is in US government bonds, particularly. That's where that money goes, into US corporates or into people buying houses in Australia, for instance. That's where the money goes. We're borrowing the money to help out these people who want some return on their money. Otherwise, it sits in a bank and gets no return. So if you've got too much money and not enough borrowers, the price of money goes down, and that's the price of money is your interest rate. So it's not unusual to think why interest rates have gone down, apart from inflation, but that's one of the reasons why you've got cheap money these days. So we've got cheap money because there's a glut of money, but we've also got this something called quantitative easing, which is a new concept. It was basically developed during the GFC. It's an economic concept of how do you get an economy resuscitated if it's in recession. So it's a new economic lever. In the past, you used to have Keynesian economics, which said, if you go in a recession, governments spend more money. Spend money, roads, schools, hospitals, whatever it is, and gets jobs out there from carpenters, plumbers, concreters, then your suppliers, the Bunnings, the cement mix people, they all sort of have a knock-on effect if you spend money. And governments did that during the GFC, but they also came up with this new concept of quantitative easing. If interest rates are lower, you can borrow more money. And it also means you can go into investments that you couldn't afford to before. So if you're a company, you have what we call benchmarks to invest your money. So if you've got a new mine, coal mine, iron ore mine, a new factory, and you lower the interest rates, you then would go and take that money and invest because you can make money on it. If interest rates are high, you've got a higher hurdle, higher profit hurdle before you would actually invest. So the thinking around quantitative easing is you try and artificially drop interest rates lower than they normally would be. And how do you do that? Well, the Reserve Bank controls interest rates in Australia by buying and selling on what we call the bank bill market. Well, this same concept then is being applied to government bonds. So you have a new entrant into the government bond market, and it's called the Reserve Banks. Reserve banks in America and in Europe went into the bond market and bought lots of bonds. So it's really one part of the government issuing bonds and the other part of the government, Reserve banks, buying them. Now doing that, if they go in and compete for the bonds, you push the price of interest rates down. Now how does that work? Well, with a bond, you get $100 back at maturity. But when you buy them at less the value. So if you want a 5% return, you buy a bond at $95. 12 months later, you get your 100. But if you push the price of bonds up to say $98, your interest rate drops to 2%. Now, if you get the Reserve Bank to go in and flood the money with buying these bonds, you'll push the interest rates down. And that's how it works. Because it's a reverse of what you normally get. Normally you buy, well, if you put your money in term deposit, you put your $100 in, you expect you get $102 back. But this is a way of influencing interest rates. It's a new concept. It was developed under the tutelage of Ben Bernanke, who was the head of the Reserve Bank in the US. Completely new concept to try and get interest rates down. So then people will then go and borrow money for a house, a car, a factory, a 999, whatever it is. And that worked through the GFC. So how did it work? Well, because it dropped interest rates very quickly and gave people who were already borrowed money, who were people who borrowed for houses or cars or whatever, it dropped their interest rates, so they got a bit of a benefit from that. They didn't have to pay as much on the home loan or their car loan, but it also meant that people could go out and buy a new car or buy a new house because their interest rates are so low. Now, if you've got the fact that interest rates are being pushed down by inflation, you've got a government, the Reserve Bank's pushing interest rates down, you're getting now ultra low interest rates around the world. So interest rates are now lower than we've ever had before in history. In recorded history, you can go back 500 years, 1,000 years. We can't find a time when interest rates have been lower. Because they've been artificially pushed down by reserve banks and China being pulling down inflation. So what does that mean? Well, it means some countries have got negative interest rates, as we're saying. That's not a good thing, is it? Because if you're investing and you get less money back from the start, you're not happy. But it's around the world. It's not just one or two countries. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 major countries around the world where you can go on a 1-year investment and get less money back than you started with. And some countries like Switzerland, even if you invest for 20 years, normally you get a higher interest rate as you go out, you get less money back than you started with. So that's a challenging concept for anyone who's retired. In Switzerland, in Japan, in Germany, in Austria, Netherlands, Belgium, Finland, France, Sweden, and these are not countries that are second world countries, they're in first world countries where people have got high wages and are retiring. Fortunately, a lot of these countries have national pension schemes. Like Germany and Austria, Switzerland, they've got national pension schemes. So, you're not reliant completely on your own resources, but they're effectively pulling down what you can earn on your money. But let's come back to Australia. What can we get on term deposits? Well, roughly around just over 1% today. So if you had $1 million, you're only getting in the Commonwealth Bank $13,500 a year in interest. So you're not going to be able to live on that if the average couple in Canberra lives on about $60,000. So not happy. NAB's no better, Westpac's no better, and ANZ's even worse. Even if you went out to 5 years, because normally you get a higher rate on a 5-year rate, it's actually less, roughly, than the 1-year rate. Because banks are saying, well, we expect your interest rates to keep falling, so we're not going to give you more money to invest for longer term. Because their interest rates have dropped to roughly 3.25% in the last 12 or 18 months. Anyway. Short term, it can get a bit over 1% in special rates, NAB rates, 90 days or a 6-month rate, which is obviously special rates. And then if you've got 12 months here, 1.2, 1.1. So even for 5 years, only 1.25. So not happy. So how are we going to get a person who's retired through 20 years when rates are only 1 or 2%? Because they're saying that this artificially low rate is now going to be the norm. Because the governments have found that this is a way to keep the economy moving. If you keep interest rates at an ultra low level, keeps people buying houses, buying cars, building factories. So one way of doing it is going into the corporate bond sector and going for more risky investments. So BB credit ratings, which means, well, something like Coles Myer, for instance, a BB. So it's not that risky. but you get a bit higher rate, but not fantastically better. Or you can go to second and third world countries and buy the government bonds. The only problem with that is sometimes they don't pay you back. So Argentina's been just recently had a crisis where they go from one crisis to the next, but this is the number of countries in the world which have defaulted in the last 500 years, basically. Even England's defaulted last time in 1596, but it was a time of Henry VIII or something like that. Yeah, they ran out of money going to war somewhere. But yeah, so countries, Greece, 932. Technically, they defaulted, I think, about 10 years ago, but they didn't completely default because the Germans kept them going. Spain, China, Brazil. So it's not probably the best way to go is to try and find second and third world countries, because they're poorly managed countries. They go into default every now and again, and you don't want to lose your capital, as well as just to try and get a better interest rate. Again, we're talking about low inflation, as this is just going back to 1991 now. When you used to get 5 or 6% inflation through the 90s, that's an average. Now we're averaging out for the last, say, 5 or 10 years, we've averaged only about 2 to 3. And the government's trying to get that up, but it hasn't. That's a projection. But we've been down to just about 1%. So if you get 1% in the bank and 1% inflation, you're just staying in front, You're just keeping your capital value. So low inflation, low interest rates. And another factor is that low inflation is going to keep interest rates down. So you've really got to get 1 to 2% on your money to keep your value, without, even if you just reinvested it, but obviously most people got to live off this as well. So there's other options, shares and property. So I'll go through those options. Now most of you have, through your balance funds, shares and property. The problem for most people is you wouldn't put all your money in shares because of the volatility. And you know that there was a 54% drop in the GFC. We went back to 87, there was a 50% drop there. It does recover, but this recovery has taken a long time. We were only really back to where we were in 2007. We only got back to that after 10 years, which is a bit of a long time to wait to get your capital back. So, not happy if you're going to try and get your capital out in that 10-year period. If you bought in 2007, you're losing capital. But the income looks good. This is the income on Australian shares today. If you went in to buy the Australian share portfolio of the top 300 companies, which you often do when you're buying in the portfolios we recommend, you're getting an average income around 5%. That's with the franking credits. So that's not too bad, better than 1%. And as you can see here, interest rates have gone, well, if you're back in 2009, you were getting around 7 or 8. During the GFC, it dropped to 3. Bit of a message here. If you sold your shares in 2007 and 8, you were selling off an income of nearly 9%. And you're buying a term deposit 3. Now, when we went through that GFC, I pointed out to some of you at that time that there wasn't much point pulling out your investments because you're selling a high income to buy a low income. That's pretty silly. You wait for the capital to recover, and in the meantime, if you'd bought in that period, you bought a 9% income, which starts your growth in income from that point in time, because the big thing about shares is the income keeps growing most years. The other point is that in Australia, we have one of the highest income payouts in the world for our share market. So this one's showing you that Australia, the average dividend is around 4.5%. This was showing you the government bond yield going back a bit now at 2%. So 2% is not as good as 4.5%, so you'd buy shares if you had the two choices. In the UK, there's a similar sort of story. 4% versus 1, you'd buy shares. France, roughly 0.25% on government bonds, 3.5%. In Switzerland, negative, but if you bought a range of Swiss shares, you'd be getting 3.5%, and so forth. So it's all a story there showing you that shares can give you a good income, even though the value of those shares can go up and down. So that's a good starting point. The second point is they do pay out a lot of their dividends. So it's all very good to have dividends, but if they just reinvest it back in the company, you're not going to see that. So the key thing here is, how much do they pay out? Well, Australia, again, is leading the pack, giving 70% of your dividends back into the client who is you, the shareholder. And the long-term average payout is there as well. So payouts, that was 2015, but on average we were paying 60% of the dividends out. A lot of countries similar, but mostly lower. So we're Australia, we've got good high income from shares, plus they pay most of it out. And this is the longer term story though. If you look at this dividend income, which is the bars here, look at those bars. If you started out in 1980 and bought $100,000 worth of shares, the initial income was about $5,000. Today, that income is around 55,000. From 5 to 55,000, roughly a 10-fold increase in income. The value of the shares has gone up as well, because there's alignment between the value of the income and the value of the shares. So if your income goes up, your shares are more valuable, and people will buy them from you because it's got more income. Whereas looking at term deposits, a sad story. You used to get 10 to 15% interest rates on your bank deposits. Now you're down to roughly 1. So it just shows you that the old theory, don't put all eggs in a basket. If you retired in 1980 and were thinking, well, 10 to 15% interest rate's going to do for me, I'll just sit in term deposits. The story of 20 years, and this is what you've got to remember, long term, you've just got to look at which income is going to give you the best return over time. And bear in mind that everyone in this room had superannuation that started in earnest in 1992 when the compulsory system came in, but a lot of them started with a CommSuper, and they were putting money into superannuation from the very first day you started, and usually roughly 2/3 of that money went into shares. And you started on that income profile from that day, from the first day you worked, because they bought your BHPs and your National Banks and the Woolies and Coles, and that income in that fund started to rise from that day. So I started in 1980 in work, so my income has been rising since that time. Inside the fund, whether it's a super fund or a pension fund, doesn't matter, your income has been rising, and the share has been becoming more valuable. This is again just to show you the dividend income. $100 here. Another way of looking at it was now worth around $400, or around, 369. So you can see this huge escalation in income over time, but you need time to do it. This is 2004. Taking the income and just getting it to rise. It does drop sometimes, but it's still rising over time. So this is something you need for your retirement. You want something that's going to rise in income over time and pay you for the rest of your life. The second point is that your value of investment goes up with it. So when you do need a new car, fix up the house, do some travel, you can come back and get money out of the fund, but it's more valuable. So you're selling off that income to someone, which, okay, that's fine. You've made your money, you can sell it to someone else and they'll make their money. But the key thing here is, we had the GFC. Before the GFC, there was a general alignment between the value of the shares and the income rising. Now the value of the shares is still below the income. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the value of shares are not overvalued at this point. If you come in and put some money with us now, you're not buying at an overvalued point, because you're getting a good income still, more income than the value of shares. So what it tells me is that we're not in an overvalued situation. People say, oh, the share market's up to where it was 2007, it must be overvalued. Well, no. In that time, your income, even though it's dropped, it's roughly recovered back to where it was valued, back in that time. Now, we had a resource boom then, that's why there was a huge shoot up in income, because BHP Rio, Santos, Woodside, all those big companies in the resource sector were making supernormal profits. In fact, it was a saying that when John Howard made allocated pensions tax-free, just the profits from Rio Tinto that were paid as tax covered that loss of revenue for the government. So that's how much the profits are going on at that time. And they dropped away, of course, but at the end of the day, they're now recovered, but they're not overvalued. This is the important thing, is about your total returns in the share market. A lot of that comes from the dividends. And it varies from year to year, but some years, obviously 1930, share values dropped, so you weren't getting much value out of the dividends. But you get lots of periods where you're getting a lot of return out of the dividends. Then commercial property. Commercial property, most people don't think that they've got commercial property, but they do have it in their portfolios. They're, you're going to be, you know, your Woden town squares, they're going to be commercial properties and office space, they're going to be warehouses, hotels, and they provide a good income. But they are also volatile. So during the GFC, property values dropped by 60% on the share market, on the property index. I haven't got a graph going back, couldn't get one for 2007 and 8 and 9, but even though you see the volatility is there. So we still got to accept some volatility in property. It doesn't go up in a straight line. But the key thing is, it's housing, won't go into that one, but the key thing is, if you look at the two growth investments, shares and property, they're giving good incomes today of around, the property's giving you around 5%, and the shares a bit more than that, around a bit over 5 maybe. Interest rates 1. So where's most of your money? It's in these two, not down here. Because we want to get you through retirement and still have enough income to live on. So it's a diversified investment portfolio. Most people are in a balanced fund or a growth fund here, and we can diversify the risk by diversifying across different sectors, across money in Australia, some overseas, some in government bonds, some in cash, but you've got a diversified fund. And what's the income of that fund? The last 10 years, a balanced fund, the one that we mostly use here, has averaged a 5.7% income. And that income's rising because the share profits keep going up, the dividends, the rent from properties keep going up. That income rises over time. Of all of diversified funds we went and looked at, it's pretty much one of the highest incomes. The only one, Schroders, which you might not know about, and BlackRock got about a little bit slightly higher. But if you can look at something, a lot of people used to be in MLC, the balance fund, their income is nearly about half. So the fund you're using is a high income fund. So why is it so much better than the other balance funds? Well, one is the fees are lower. That means it's not taking money off your income because all your returns are after fees. You've got a range of dividends, rent, coupons, a whole range of earnings. Now, one of the interesting ones is capital gains. If we sell something for a profit, it goes back into your income. And if we can move the money between sectors, you can actually make more money than just keeping it in single sectors. So the diversified fund has got a good income. Diversification reduces your risks because if something goes down, something goes up. And this is a profile of the income on that balanced fund. So I've got the research people in AMP to go back and show us where the income comes. So interest income goes up and down a bit. It's not much of your returns coming from interest. Dividends, though, vary a bit, but they're a big portion of your returns. Foreign income comes in. It can vary a bit from year to year because of currency a bit. But you can get to some years you get big capital gains from moving the money around. You can see that big slabs of returns can come from capital gains. Sometimes from selling the currency, sometimes from moving in and out of the share markets in Australia and overseas. So you've got a whole range of earnings coming in, but primarily not relying on interest because we know that's not going to get you through retirement. Even without having interest rates falling, it's not been the one that gets you through 20 years. So the other thing to think about is that most people think that if your market goes up and down, that's not a good thing. You'd rather see the market go up in a nice straight line, then you wouldn't have to worry. You sleep well at night, always market investments going up, don't have to worry. But in fact, that doesn't give us the best return. The best return is if it goes up and down. We can sell here, buy back here. Sell here, buy back here. And if you do that over a 10-year period, you can actually double your returns. This doesn't give you the best return. You need volatility for us to make money. And we call it volatility is your friend in this environment. You want up and down, so that allows us to buy down in these dips and troughs. Last year, from September, October, November, December, the markets dropped. The Australian share market dropped 14%. We bought back in. The share market this year is up 20. We're selling down. So that can then add back into your income as a capital gain. Sell high, buy cheap. Sell high, buy cheap. We want it to go up and down. So when you hear it goes down a bit, you know we're buying, it's going up, we're selling. And the result of that is we can earn more money for you. Now this is an example I've done an example of going back over 10 years and looking if we just kept your money in little silos. One silo called Australian shares, another silo called international shares, property, government bonds and cash. If we just kept them in silos, your actual income will be about 4%. But if using our fund, we've got 5.7. And that's because we're moving between the sectors. That has added roughly 1.7% a year in income for you every year for 10 years. So that's better than just keeping it silent. So that's why we use that multi-sector fund. There's a great benefit because we can move the money around to make more money for you. So we do what we call a benchmark approach. So if it's over the benchmark, we know it's gone up in value, we have to pull it back and sell it down. If it's below the benchmark, we have to buy back in because it's gone down, it's got cheap. So this is back in June. The share market in Australia was undervalued by about 3% against the benchmark. We had to buy in, and overseas shares were roughly overvalued by 3%, so we have to sell out. And that process means is selling the international shares, making profit, buying back in Australian shares at a discount. Income, as I said, around 5.7% for the last 10 years. Last year it was about 5.3%. For the 3 years, average 7%, around 6%. Fairly consistent, around the 5 to 6% rate. So if you had $1 million in this fund, you're getting 50,000, 70,000, 50,000, 70,000 returns on your money. But you're also getting the value investment growing as well. Your capital growth, your capital gains. So the average for the 10 years is 2.3% per year, which means that your capital values, and most people when we come in and do reviews, have found they've got more. Well, last year, 2018-19, you had more money than you started with, even after most people were taking out 6 and 7%, because their average return was 9%. So there's a 1, 2 or 3% gain on your portfolio, which means that you've got more capital than you started with. You can see here the bar is coloured at the top. This is a comparison of this fund to all the funds that's done by Morningstar, all the other balanced funds. You're outperformed 75% of the other funds in Australia. We use index funds. When they did a survey last year, 92% of fund managers didn't perform as good as the index. You're in an index fund, you're performing very well compared to many other fund managers. One, because you've got a low fee. Secondly, because this benchmarking approach allows us to make more money. And the third thing is you've got a good income. Much better income than many other fund managers around the place, which is good. So we've got a good fund for you. Go back there. There we go. So yeah, a lot of fund managers, 2 and 3%, up to 5 to 6, but you're in one of the better fund managers for income. So we're not going to be under the bridge at Commonwealth. And so, yeah, so what we've got is a fund that's working for you. We don't have to come in and say, oh, buy this and sell that, because it's all being done for you on a daily basis. because you're not all going to come in when the market's down, so we can put more money in. So it's rebalancing automatically for you. This is a really interesting graph because it's showing you what can happen when we get people who want to pull out when the market's down. As we know, 2008 and 9, share market's down 50%. The overseas share market was down 50%. The property market in Australia was down 60%. But there's a real temptation to say, oh, let's pull out because it might get worse. But you don't want to sell out because, as I said before, the Australian share market income at that time, you were selling 9% income to someone else. There's a saying that recessions are a time when the money goes from the poor back to the rich. The poor sell because they don't have enough information and get scared because they think the money's going to get zero. The rich buy because they look at the things that are important. They look at the income and say, I can buy a share portfolio with 9% income, and at the time you could only get 3% in the bank. They say, why would you do that? Let's buy more shares. Let's buy more 9% income. So this example of somebody who said, oh, share market's gone down, my investment's gone down, I'm going to sell out and move across to what we call a conservative portfolio, where it's more government bonds and cash. That person now has, even though the returns have been okay on conservative funds, are now down 30%. Because they sold at the bottom, didn't get any recovery, whereas the balanced funds recovered, and they're now declining their capital, whereas this one's recovered. And this is why you don't move when the markets go down. Let the investment work for you to buy more shares or property or government bonds, whatever's the cheap thing at the time. So this is called a risk of switching and reacting to the markets when you're changing your risk profile and changing your strategy. You just don't do it. So in conclusion, there's a number of ways to get income. The traditional way was going to more conservative investments, getting an income, living off that, and that's just not going to work in the future because it's going to be interest rates and inflation is going to be longer or lower, and interest rates might even go down to zero or negative. We've used, in my recommendations for most of you, a multi-sector fund because it's had good income, low fees, and we can make money for you through the time and get your income rising over time. That's a key thing. Over 20 to 30 years of retirement. Multi-sector funds allow you to move between sectors. That's something people don't appreciate, that moving between sectors makes more money for you. And a lot of people here have had their super funds in balanced funds before they even walked in the door. So my view is that unless you've had exposure to shares or done your own investments before, just use a balanced fund. It'll still get good returns for you, and you will not change your risk profile to what you were when you were working. So that gives you a pretty good story of where things are. And so I'll just go back now to see if there's any questions before we go and talk about my retirement. Okay, Graham? Yes, sir.
Just on the benchmark issue, when that's used to move between sectors, who creates that benchmark and how's it calculated?
Okay, well, there's a... Sorry, the benchmark's based on... a benchmark for a balanced fund should be between 50 and 70% growth investments. That is property and shares. That's an accepted benchmark in Australia for a balanced fund. We're higher on the benchmark than most. We're 70%. Some funds only have 50. So we're higher on the benchmark, but that's good because over time your property and shares are going to do better than money in the bank and government bonds. But it's an internationally accepted benchmark. Yeah.
Russell, what's the difference between an index balanced fund and a balanced fund?
Well, yeah, it's okay. Index funds, we don't have a fund manager. So what is a fund manager? A fund manager is somebody who sits there every day. They might be in the share market, they might work in the property market, they might work in the government bonds, and they say, yeah, buy Woolworths and Coles today, sell National Bank today. That's where you have a fund manager, an active fund manager, sitting down saying, what sort of investments you're going to buy. Your balanced fund, being an index fund, means that you just buy the top 300 companies in Australia. You don't have a fund manager. You just say, you ring up the share markets, the stock exchange, and say, what proportion in value is each one of those companies. Now we call that capitalisation, just the value of the company. And we proportion your investment over 300 companies, but we just don't give you 1/300th in BHP, National Bank, Woolies. We proportion it to how big that company is. So the biggest companies get the most money, the small companies get the least amount. The consequence of that is you've got to bet on every horse in the race. The key thing when I was saying that survey did was that 92% of fund managers didn't get to the index, was that it's very hard to predict who's going to be the winner this year in shares or government or property. It's very hard to predict the future. But if you diversify across the whole range, you'll always have winners and losers, but you're going to get a good average. And then if you can keep the fees down, there's more money going back to you as income. So an active management is where you have a fund manager. That's where most, I think about 90% of the money in Australia invested is actually with active managers. About 10% is with index fund managers. In America, it's about 20% of all money's invested in index funds. It just varies from country to country. But I've only used index funds, one, because they've had low fees for a start. That's a good start. Because effectively, an active manager's got to get about 0.5% better return every year just to get the same return as an index fund. The second thing is, if returns are falling, that 0.5% is a very high proportion of your money you've got to earn every year. If earnings rates are 10 to 15%, 0.5% doesn't matter much. But if earnings rates are going to be 5%, 0.5% off the top every year is 10% of your earnings. So that's why we use index funds. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll introduce you to Andrew now. Andrew's our new owner, who's going to lead us into the future. There we go. So Andrew Williams from Sydney, and he's actually going to be, was one of our area managers in Charter. Now runs a company called Spencer Fuller, which is based in Bathurst. And so he's been in the industry for 22 years, so he's very experienced, been a planner, worked in the corporate world in a number of roles in BT, AMP, local government super, and now was Charter, area manager in Charter. But now he's running this organisation called Spencer Fuller, and they've bought a number of practices around Australia, mostly New South Wales, in the States. So they've got practices in Bathurst, that's where the main headquarters is. They've got some practice in Sydney, and they've bought a couple of other practices. But I'll hand you over to Andrew, because you're going to tell me how I'm going to retire in comfort and live under the bridge.
Thanks, Russell. I've been given instructions to stand about here. Is that Abdul's directing? Yeah, excellent.
That's fine.
22 years, that's a long time. It feels actually a little bit like yesterday, because this number popped up and said, "Oh, how long have you been in the industry?" In fact, I was at a seminar last week, and a gentleman got up and he looked very old. And he said, "I've been in this industry a really long time, for 20 years. And I'm sitting there in the audience and looking around and thinking, yeah, okay. It goes quick, and I've seen a lot. And when I say I've seen a lot in financial services, it's been good, bad, indifferent, ugly, crises, GFCs, Royal Commissions, scandals, the works. And just, I should say a big thank you to Nicola, who's put up here, previously a young lawyer. And that was a long time ago. I saw an ad in the paper as a young lawyer sitting in a room about the size of the chair that you're sitting on, and it said, "Become a financial advisor. There's this new career." And AMP was advertising that. And I thought, oh, I'll try something new, I'll have a go at it. My parents were horrified. But I turned out I had a fairly good aptitude for it, and here I am. And I am a business owner like Russell. And so I've known Russell for a number of years. My last corporate role was with Charter. And a few years back, in fact, April 2016, myself and another gentleman, we bought a practice called Spencer Fuller. Spencer Fuller is in Bathurst, as Russell's mentioned. So I thought it was a good opportunity. Russell said, "I've got a few clients coming along to a seminar. This is the second seminar I've been, and I think this would be like 200 people you've got in front of in the last 3 months, which is really impressive. And it shows the value that you see in Russell and the connection he has with his clients. Because I know from being in the industry this long, we're not in a financial planning industry, we're in a people industry. We're in a relationship industry. And chatting to a couple of you here already, the relationship you have with Russell, mind you, he knows a lot about a lot of things, that's also important, but the relationship that Russell has with you is important in how he's guiding you pre-retirement and also in retirement. And I'd say at the outset, that's what we'd like to continue. That philosophy, that culture, and when we finally let Russell go, we want to keep him for as long as we can, continue that legacy as well. So Spencer Fuller, just quickly, I'll talk about who we are and where we've come from, and then I'll get on to why are we buying practices and why are we expanding in New South Wales ACT. So Spencer Fuller started by a lady called Marion Spencer in the late 60s. This is going back a while. Late 60s, she was a trailblazer insurance broker for a business called Temperance and General. And lovely lady, she's still alive, in her 90s, comes and visits for morning tea occasionally. And in the late 80s, she met up with a gentleman by the name of David Fuller. And they shared some back office, they shared some staff, and they combined together and called themselves Spencer Fuller and Associates. And that brand has been around in Bathurst for 30 odd years. And as the market's changed and times changed, I was David's regional manager. And he was talking about an exit strategy, as people with businesses do. And so I knew another gentleman, his name's Bernard Begg. If you look on our website, you'll see Bernard there. He lives in Bathurst, whereas I live in Sydney. So he's a little bit country, a bit city. So I kept telling him. We said, well, let's expand this practice. So we know some advisors. We think we know how to run businesses. So we opened an office in Sydney, in Orange. We've got a practice in Port Macquarie. We'll soon have a practice in Wollongong and the Central Coast. And we now have a practice in the lovely state of ACT at Russell's business. Unless you've been living on maybe Mars, you would know that this industry's gone through some trouble and change. Banks do not provide financial advice anymore. The big institutions don't provide advice anymore or are getting out of that. And the Royal Commission, I think, was something we had to have in an industry to finally put a stop to what you heard, vertically integrated models. Someone selling you a product that they were owned by the product manufacturer, and that's what you're going to get regardless. That was a bad thing, it manifested itself, and something has been stopped. And that's a good thing for the industry. So for businesses like ours, our advice comes first. What it's caused though is, what do advisors do? As a young advisor, where do you go? The banks aren't employing. Where can you go and get a role? Well, you can go and get a role in a business like ours. And so if you look at the business cycle of advice at the moment, we're over here. Stabilisation and deceleration. 2,500 advisors got out of the industry in the last 12 months. A grand total of 19 joined. Even my maths, not as good as Russell's, will work out in 10 years there won't be any advisors around. And yet we're about to experience, it's already started, as baby boomers are retiring. The biggest wave of retirees is about to hit the market, and it's vitally important, and it's always a reminder when you listen to Russell's talks, how important it is to get advice. And we think there's a great opportunity to continue to deliver this type of advice. The pioneering phase is when Marion started. The growth phase is when the banks were into it. Mature growth. Probably in the late 90s when I started. And when I said I saw it all, a lot of this time now, the industry's starting to pay for some of the poor models and poor advice that was given. I'm eventually going to get the buttons right here. So if you talk just about AMP, they've openly said that half of their advice network is going. So they were one of the biggest licensees in the world, in Australia. 2,500 will disappear. And that's because they think that the sole practitioner is not economically viable. Russell was a sole practitioner. And that's due to compliance and legislative change, not necessarily the advisor. All this idea of trailers, extra commissions, bonuses for having more businesses, all gone. We charge a fee, like Russell charges a fee. There's still commission in insurance. That's the way insurance works. We can talk about that for the next couple of hours if you want. But we charge a fee for our advice. The other thing that's coming is higher education, higher standards. There's been a double-edged sword. Russell said he's got about 1 to 2 years transition, and we'll get to that in a minute. So we've got about 2 years to clone Russell, download all the information into a USB, and try and save that. Unfortunately, with the change in the industry, there is a wave of knowledge that's going to leave. Experience. So if you've been an advisor for 20 years, but you don't have the education qualifications, you don't have a degree in financial advice, or a like degree, like in economics, your time is up. By 2024, you've got time to do that, and if you don't, you won't be licensed. And the reason why the industry's done that is trying to lift the standards like other professions, because it hasn't. When I turned up to be an advisor, really they just needed to know that I was breathing, and they were going to train me to do it. Okay, I had other degrees, but there was no real formal education. We started what was called a diploma of financial planning. And in those days, it really wasn't the education that was required to be an advisor. So we're looking at about 50% of the industry not satisfying these requirements in the next couple of years. So I mentioned what we're doing, and we're taking the opportunity to move away from the large institutional advice model into a private advice model. And by private is that our business is owned by shareholder advisors. I'm a shareholder, the other advisors are a shareholder. We're inviting other practices to become shareholders, and so that they've got their business to grow and can grow, but doing it in a way that's more efficient, more scalable, and so that we can deliver client advice to people like yourself. So what I give someone like Russell the opportunity, he's been in the industry for a long time, is to transition out. I'm not using the R word, I'm using the T word, transition. But Russell's been talking about retirement for a long time, not about himself, but to you, to his clients. But it's not till you go into it and it's there, and you've got to make those decisions, that you realise how emotional it can be, how challenging it can be. It is a big thing. And so Russell and I have been talking about this because we've known each other for a number of years, for about 12 months, maybe a little bit over. And I knew this day would come at some stage, that we'd be standing in front of his, a portion of his clients saying Russell's going to eventually retire. So what does that look like in here now? Well, when Russell said things will stay the same, that is the model we'd like. We think there's a lot of value in practices in regional New South Wales, and we want to maintain that. So we want to maintain the uniqueness that Russell has built in that. We'll add advisors. I'm not an advisor anymore, and I work out of Sydney managing the business, but we will look to expand the business to be able to deliver this type of service to a wider and a broader audience and client base. The two things that we spoke about when we first started talking was Russell's culture and his investment philosophy. And if you went for a trip to Bathurst, or come to Sydney and see our office in Spencer Fuller in Sydney, you would see advisors that have the same investment philosophy and I believe the same culture. And that's very important because, as I said in the start, this is a relationship business. So a lot of the things that Russell was just talking about there, about multi-sector funds, these are the things that we firmly believe in. Russell's going to continue and phase out over 2 years. That's a guide. And that sometimes can happen early, and we've done this before with other practices, or it can happen later. Russell's wonderful staff, Abdul and Nicola, are certainly staying with us. And Russell tells me he'd love to continue to provide quarterly seminars. And we love him too, as well, because I always even learn something when I come and listen to these. Just go back one more. We have acquired practices. We feel that technology will enhance the advice service. It'll never replace people like Russell, though. If you know much about AI, it's a lot of data management and there's a lot of client information. But that ability to talk to a client, understand their needs, the nuances of that, the individual things that you're interested in as opposed to what you might be interested in, the impact that you might have, that's not something technology will do, that's something the human will do. So there'll always be that. And so that's an important component of what we want to continue to offer. The other thing I'd say, we are, financed, we're actually owned or partially owned by the Azimut Group, or Group A. They're an Italian asset manager, one of the largest in the world. They're listed on the Italian Stock Exchange, and they do this investment all around the world. So they invest in businesses like ours to then help us go and invest in businesses like Russell's. And they see Australia as a leader in regulated advice delivery. You mentioned Argentina. They've had some problems defaulting. They've got a business in Brazil, and I was at one of their conferences and some of the guys from Brazil stood up and they were talking about how they deliver advice. They charge a 4% advice fee on your assets. They charge a 4% entry fee and a 4% ongoing fee. Do people and clients in Brazil worry about the fees? No, they worry about the security of their money. And they're willing to pay that fee for that security. Totally different environment, totally unregulated. But security is a little bit different to what it is here. Australia is a trailblazer when it comes to superannuation and it comes to the framework of the delivery advice and the legislation around it. And Azimut has seen this, and they've now acquired 23 practices throughout Australia. They're very standoffish, so we run our practices. They come and see us occasionally, and we report on that. But they're shareholders just like we're shareholders. The reason why we mention that is that we've got scale and support. We're not a business that's just a couple of blokes who've decided to buy Russell's practice. We are plugged into a multinational that's here and here for the long term. They've been around for 30 years, and that is all they do, is invest in businesses like ours. Yeah, I've gone backwards and forwards on multiple occasions. There we go. So, I'm excited about this, and I'm excited that Russell's not leaving now, that he's transitioning, that we're going to be able to execute a plan for something that I've talked to a lot of businesses about. And I've seen this happen, and I've seen advisors leave and shut up shop. And the biggest impact is not really on the advisor, it's on the clients. So we want to make sure that you're comfortable and know that Russell for himself is doing the right thing. And don't forget, Julie's signed off on this. And that you've got the comfort and security that you know when we're here and new advisors are sitting in a room and saying, oh, you know Russell, but now I'm going to look after his stuff. You know who stands behind it, you know the philosophy of it, you know the culture of it, and you know that we as a business are here for the long term and want to continue the passion that Russell's had for advice. Any questions? Yes.
I noticed, I think you said that you wouldn't be bound to any particular fund provider, e.g. AMP, but I noticed you said we'd stick with My North and North.
Yeah, so it's a good question. North and My North are the platforms. So we may invest on that platform. We invest on other platforms like BT, Hub24, Colonial First State. It's the underlying asset that we're under no obligation to invest in AMP. AMP has some good funds, some marginal funds. It's, as an asset manager, they're okay. As an index fund manager, they're pretty good. But we've got a full suite of access to funds, all funds, and we're not beholden to any one.
Can I ask what percentage the Italians have interest in your business?
Yeah, 51%.
That was the concern. I would be happy with 48.
Well, if they, so when I say 51%, it is, their model doesn't work at 52% or 60% or 70%. They want people like us in the business. They don't want to create an employed in planner model or to control the businesses they've got. They want us to be in there running them, because as shareholders we share in the value of that business. And that's the model that they've used. And they use that model around the world. And we're comfortable with that because at some stage in the future, 20 years, that's potentially my exit strategy as well, and allow other advisors to come in. So they support us. We don't need, for example, we don't need someone to come in and just buy my shares. They can come into the practice, they can work, we can see how they're going, and then Azimuth can say, okay, well, you can have shares in that practice. And that's the same for all of those businesses.
Will you continue to draw on the advice of Dr. Shane Oliver?
Yes, is the short answer. So we've got access to Shane. So we are a charter practice, and we intend to be a charter practice. Charter started as National Mutual and AXA and was purchased by AMP, and Charter was really the AXA component of it. And so a lot of practices like ours, you'll see that they've gone on that journey. Although AMP is taking a beating in the media at the moment and on the share market, they still have a lot of good resources, and Shane's one of them.
I was coming from that point of view. I didn't explain, I'm sorry, but yeah. Shane, I think, has contributed valuably to our operations here.
Yeah, I'd agree. And we've still got access to him, as other economists as well. Russell could be our economist. He could be looking for work.
Has the planner been appointed yet? Because I think on a previous session we met somebody called Joel from the South Coast.
Yeah,
Is that him, or?
you have.
Okay.
No. So we're very conscious, when I mentioned the word culture, of getting the planner right. And we may have a couple of goes at that. That's why in this transition Russell's going to be around. Because if we employed a planner that wasn't right, that's going to be a problem. I don't think Joel fitted. He kind of made that decision himself. But we do have, beyond cloning Russell, we do have other options, and there'll be other advisors joining the business shortly.
So just on Azimuth Group, they seem to have two functions. One is the funding of the acquisition of practices, and the other one is to be a shareholder with you and the others in something. What are they shareholders in?
They're shareholders in the entity Spencer Fuller.
Okay, and that's a corporate entity.
That's our business,
Yeah.
and the other 49% are 6 other shareholders, one including myself. And those shareholders will grow over time. Azimuth holds that 51%. They do that via another Australian company called AZNGA, and that's because that's an Australian company, and that is a business that believes in this new model of advice, which is not a product manufacturer.
Why wouldn't they have gone for a 49% of their shareholding, so they didn't have a control in the shareholding of the company, as to allow you, the on-the-ground operators and the investors and part owners, be in complete control? Why wouldn't they have gone for that?
So, yeah, good question. the reason is as a 51% shareholder, their entire global earnings goes up as the value of their business onto the Italian Stock Exchange. As a 49% owner, they wouldn't include this business. And so at the moment, we're managing about $500 million worth of money, of clients' money, and they see that as, okay, well, that's an asset that's generating advice fees for us and them, and we share in that return.
In terms of Russell, or maybe Russell can answer the question, in terms of the transition, Russell, so over what's your retirement, fully retired in 2 years' time, what's the plan for the transition? So if I rang up in 12 months' time, would I be talking to you? I mean, would you be there sort of full-time roughly in the next 12 months, and would the new person...
Transition in, generally the plan was to have a joint interview initially with the new planner, and then you get to know him, or at least be there. The second time you come in, well, you can just go straight to the new planner, and then I'll still be in the background. That's the idea. So won't be sort of walk out and leave you stranded. But the main thing is to get the philosophy the same type of planner with the same philosophies and the way of approaching things. Obviously, no one's indispensable, but the big area which I can improve on in my business is the back office, providing the expertise of Spencer Fuller is really much better in the electronic delivery of services. Now, not that we're going to be sending you emails all the time, but what they can do is a lot of the costs in business are in the back office. We're still going to keep the staff, but we can do it more efficiently. And that's one way you can keep the cost down and keep the delivery of services. The second thing is it gives you options of delivering a better service. In the past, we had the old paper files, which everyone who worked in the public service, you had a file, a compactus, a filing cabinet, all those sort of things. So in the future, those back office things will be more in electronic form. We'll still do paper presentations to you, but then a lot of that stuff will go into electronic systems, which these guys have got a lot of experience about and know. They've got tested systems they can apply into our office straight away, pretty much, and that's where we can keep the costs down and keep delivering good services to you.
Given that the Italian government is notoriously volatile and short-lived, what is the likely impact of government regulation on Azimut?
Yep, great question. Anyone know anything about Italian politics? My undergraduate degree was in political science, and I was talking to Massimo, who's the group CEO of Azimut, and I made a quip at him because the last time they turfed out their Prime Minister, and it was like, yeah, so who is your Prime Minister today? This was like Australia. Yeah, they've got about 5 different parties. They've all got to agree on one Prime Minister. It's a different system. They will argue that it's more democratic. We would just argue it's just out of control. The political system and Azimut as a business on their stock exchange and running their global practice, the two don't mix. They aren't a political...
couldn't be nationalised, for example.
No. And in fact, their business is domiciled in Luxembourg. So, without stating the obvious, they are probably doing some tax stuff that we're not allowed to do here. And they're managing enormous amounts of money. But the Australian business is really siloed. So the Australian business, there is an exit strategy. If Azimut wanted to get out of our practice, they can, and we can get out of it and still continue. So I'm a pretty conservative guy as well. I've got a young family and school fees to pay and mortgages, etc. I didn't want to risk anything at this stage in my young career, but it is Azimut is very secure. But it's a valid question, and I'm sure next year they'll have a new Prime Minister.
Azimut got into trouble financially. Our investments would be quarantined.
Yeah, your investments aren't in Azimut. Your investments are in things like what Russell was talking about. Yeah. So there's we don't invest in any of Azimut themselves. Like our direct equities exposure is not in the Italian stock exchange, as strong and as robust as it is.
Just got a quick question about your financial advisors that will be coming in. So, one to begin with, a couple?
Well, there's Abdul.
Yeah.
He's a licensed financial advisor, so he'll help with a lot of the reviews that you'll do. So it's a familiar face.
Will it be like, I mean, Russell knows my holidays, he knows my family. Knows all about A&P. Is it going to be on a personal level? Like a system?
No. And it's lovely to hear that. The answer is yes, because the real value of advice is exactly what you've described. An advisor knows everything. When I was providing advice, I would know more about you than your doctor would, because I know what's in your bank account and I know what's in your medical records, because you've done insurance. I know everything. It is a very personal relationship. That's the power of it. And for people who've been around as long as we have, thinking that you can get robo-advice, that you can do it via a video, that you miss so much in that. This is a personal game. Oh, okay.
Whilst you say that Azimut has a controlling interest in Spencer Fuller, you also indicated that your operations on our behalf will not be dictated to in any way by Azimut.
So when you talk about operations, your investments?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for example, they wouldn't say, we wish you, or we're directing you to channel 20% of your clients' assets into these particular businesses. You're totally independent in that sense.
Yeah. So if we started to do that, or Azimut tried to do that, ASIC would come knocking on our door and we'd be in lots of trouble. We're back to the original point. If we're in a wonder, even though some people will say we are over-regulated, that's a good thing. And we can still stay in that over-regulated environment that ultimately benefits yourself and businesses like us. Yes?
Is it going to be up to us to schedule an interview with Russell and a new planner, or is the company going to let us know you need to come in so you can meet the new planner while Russell's still there?
So a bit of both. So there'll be people here that do a regular review 12 months with Russell.
That's right.
Yeah. So we'd maintain that. And so at that time, either you'll just meet with Russell and do your regular review, and there might be another advisor there, and we'll go through that transition then. Or you might be able to meet with that person directly. It'd be great if Russell can do every meeting and every handover, but there's only one Russell.
We've got 2 years.
We all do that. And yeah, we do. And yeah, it's not a rush. It is truly a transition.
So when is the new advisor being appointed?
There'll be a new advisor on the ground in the new year.
Within a year?
In the new year.
On New Year's?
Yep. New year. So Christmas is almost upon us. We've had that horse race. We're now in the run to the silly season, or in it. People go away in January, and at some stage in the middle of January, everyone wakes up and decides, hey, I'm going to go back to work.
So does this mean that the relationship of Charter and AMP will no longer be, or will be continuing to reduce?
That's it's an interesting question. Charter is a licence, and their primary role is to be the licence and provide us the quality assurance that we require in delivering advice. It was set up originally to be a conduit to AMP products. That's what really now has stopped. So even though North is a preferred platform, it's not the required, and we don't need to invest in AMP. If we were an AMP practice, different story. They limited what's called an approved product list, or APL. We don't have that. We have a conservative product list, but we can diversify into a whole range of brands.
Could you just spell out the relationship with AMP?
So AMP owns Charter. They own the business Charter.
Yeah.
It's one of their 3 licenses. They have an AMP licence. Hill Ross is another brand they own, and Charter.
So, roughly, you'll have no more to do with AMP than what Russell did.
That's right. Exactly the same.
Same.
Yep. Spencer Fuller's licensed under Charter. And I know Russell's business, so we're very similar in that respect.
Does Spencer Fuller have a standard fee structure, and does it differ from what we pay now?
We do have a standard fee structure, and it's very similar to what Russell's is.
Very similar.
As in the same. and look, Sydney, you need to charge more. It costs them more. Significantly more. So in certain areas, and we'd be able to manage those costs better, but the costs in this industry sadly have gone up and up, mainly through compliance, licensing, regulation.
Are you staying in the same premises?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. If we moved, it wouldn't be more than 100 metres away. It's a nice part of the world. Now I know some people have got to go. I'm happy to stay around and answer questions. We're nearly done, but look, on behalf of us, we're excited about now being part of Russell's business, and I'd like to say thanks to Russell for the time and effort that he's put in, not only to his business, to his clients, but also in this last 12 months in dealing with us. He's been a true professional, and we're really looking forward to working with him and helping him with his transition into retirement.
Thanks for all turning out. It was really, when I heard last week we had 50, 60, and then 70 or 80, and then there's 100, and there's 120. Oh, they really like my seminars, don't they? So, no, it's obviously a bit of a transition. We're trying to, as Andrew was saying, they've done this transition for a number of practices. And Azimut's done this sort of thing around the world. So they've bought practices. They know that they want to keep, you want to keep the clients on board, and then one of the best ways to keep things the same. So we're trying to keep everything the same. And so you won't really see a difference except on phasing out over time. And that gives us time for a new planner to get on board, get to know you, you'll get to know him. We'll probably may do joint seminars. I'll do half and he might do half, that sort of thing. We want somebody who's going to really fit into my shoes and do the same sort of approach. And the main thing is that, I've done the industry 29 years. It was, very new industry, and we went through this rapid growth in this industry, growing from literally nothing to now we're looking after the planners in Australia around was about 28,000, now down to 25. But now in this rationalisation phase where the industry looks after $2.7 trillion, the 4th biggest pot of super money in the world, and we're only a very small country. So we've got a lot of responsibility to get you through the 20, 30 years of retirement. There's been a lot of, people who've gone the wrong way, done the wrong thing. Regulations come in, that's a normal transition of industry. In 1900, there was over 100 manufacturers of cars in America. Now there's only about 2 or 3. The same thing will happen in our industry, and Andrew's offer is what really is going to happen is you need economies of scale, people who can do back office work electronically. We're going to pass out some of the planning work to South Coast, so that not South Coast, Central Coast, where it releases our ability to do more of the high value added work. A lot of electronic stuff will be happening in the back office, so you will cut our costs. But the whole thing is to try and give the front end delivery the same. And so this is a step, in the evolution of the industry of moving from one single practice, people where, as I said, AMP's drawn the line in the sand, so we can't really have those single practices on our books because they cost us too much money. That's where a lot of their compliance problems came from. We're moving into a professional world. So similar to the accounting world or the legal world, the world is moving on. So, but yeah, it's been an incredible journey for me, because one of the things of being in the industry very early was you can see the evolution of improving the delivery to the clients. One, in fees. Fees have dropped by about 75% over time. You used to charge a 4 or 5% entry fee, now you charge nil. There used to be around 2% ongoing fee, now it's 0.55. So a lot of fees have come down, economies of scale, getting better regulation, and but you know, the great thing about Spencer Ford is they've done this before. They're part of their longer term part of industry, backed by big institutions, and you've got a great guy like Andrew I've known for over 5 years as an area manager, and now as our owner. So I'm confident we'll be able to look after you for the next 20, 30 years. So all we need now is just to keep on keeping on.
Slides will be available on your website.
Sorry?
Slides available on your website.
Oh yes, we're emailing the slides, so you can go through that again. And I want to also thank Abdul and Nicola, because they've, for the last 12 months we've been looking at different practices to buy, and they've stuck with it and kept us all going.
Thank you.
That's right.